I held Noah's small hand as we walked toward the glass doors of the tall building. The morning sun reflected on the windows, making the place look almost untouchable, like it belonged to a world where people like us were never meant to enter. At 62, I knew how people saw me. My gray curls tied back under a simple scarf, my long wool coat that had seen many winters. None of it matched the shine of the handbags or the sharp suits that moved swiftly past us. I had grown used to the stares that measured my worth before I ever spoke a word. Noah squeezed my fingers as he looked up, his bright brown eyes full of innocence. He didn't see the lines on my face as signs of poverty, the way others did. To him, I was just Grandma. To me, he was the only reason I still carried myself with quiet pride. We stepped inside the cafe on the first floor of the building. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air, and every table seemed to hold people dressed for success. Sleek hair, polished nails, gold watches glinting in the light. I noticed the shift in their eyes as they looked at us, just for a second too long before pretending to look away. I kept my chin high. I had lived too many years to flinch under the weight of other people's judgment. What they didn't know, what none of them could even imagine, was that I held more power in this place than they would ever dream. For them, I was invisible. But soon, they would learn the truth. "Ma'am, this place might not be for you." The words came before I had even reached the counter. The woman who spoke them had skin smooth and flawless, her hair pulled into a tight bun that gave her a permanent look of superiority. Her name tag read Victoria. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at me fully, just a quick glance that traveled from my scarf down to my old coat, then dismissed me entirely. I felt Noah's hand tighten in mine. He looked up at me with confusion, as if asking whether he had heard her right. His small voice whispered, "Grandma, why would she say that?" I ignored the sting in his words and walked closer to the counter. "We'd like a table," I said calmly. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Her lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed impatience. She leaned slightly over the register, speaking just low enough for me to hear. "Our menu is a little pricey. Perhaps another cafe might be more comfortable for you." Her words were sharp, but her tone was soft, like velvet covering a blade. She wanted to shame me without ever saying the word poor. I stood still for a moment, letting her words settle inside me. They cut, yes, but I had grown used to cuts like these. The world was full of them, disguised as advice, as kindness, as suggestion. I had spent years learning how to swallow them without letting them break me. I gave her a small nod, then turned to Noah. "Let's find a seat, sweetheart." We moved to a small table near the corner, one with a chair missing and crumbs scattered across its surface. No one else had chosen it, and I could see why. But I sat down with quiet grace, placing my hands on the table as though it were fine porcelain. Noah looked around, his brows furrowed. He noticed the way other customers looked at us. Quick glances, raised eyebrows, whispers hidden behind coffee cups. I wanted to shield him from it, but I couldn't. He was old enough to see, and young enough to ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Still, I straightened my back. I would not give anyone in that room the satisfaction of watching me bend. For them, I was just an old black woman who didn't belong. But this building, these walls, these floors, belonged to me. And one day soon, they would know it. "Grandma, why are they looking at us like that?" Noah's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that pressed against my chest. His wide brown eyes searched mine, confused and unsettled. He was only 10, too young to understand the cruelty of grown people, but old enough to notice when the world treated us differently. I glanced around. A woman in a tailored blazer whispered something to the man across from her, both of them looking our way before lowering their heads with faint smirks. At another table, Two young women scrolled through their phones, but paused long enough to glance at me, then at my coat, and laugh softly to each other. I could feel Noah's eyes still on me. He wanted answers, but what could I say? That sometimes people believed they were better because of the clothes they wore, because of the money they thought others didn't have, that they built their pride on the backs of people they decided were less. I wasn't ready for him to carry that truth yet. "They're not really looking at us," I whispered, smoothing his curls with my hand. "They're just busy with their own thoughts." He frowned, unconvinced. Children see through lies, even gentle ones. Victoria passed nearby, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She stopped at a table close enough for us to hear, her voice bright and cheerful as she greeted another customer. The warmth she offered them was nothing like the icy tone she had used with me. Noah noticed. His little mouth tightened and he leaned closer. "She's nice to them. Why not to you?" I forced a smile. "Because some people forget that kindness costs nothing." He looked at me for a long moment, as though trying to understand words far heavier than his age allowed. Then slowly he reached across the table and held my hand. His touch was warm, steady, innocent. It was a small gesture, but it carried a message. In his eyes, I was still enough. I swallowed the ache in my throat and lifted my chin. Around us, whispers and glances continued like an invisible storm. But Noah's hand in mine reminded me of something greater, why I had learned to endure. For him, I would endure anything. But one day, he would also see that I was not a woman to be pitied. The waiter approached our table, balancing a tray crowded with cups. His steps were hurried, his eyes darting past me as if I were nothing more than a chair in his way. As he leaned over to set down drinks for the couple behind us, his sleeve brushed one of the cups. A stream of hot coffee splashed across our table, dripping onto the floor and spraying close enough to stain the edge of my coat. I pulled it back quickly, steadying Noah so he wouldn't get burned. The waiter glanced at me only for a second, then continued serving the other table as though nothing had happened. "Excuse me," I said softly, my voice calm but firm. He didn't turn. He didn't offer a napkin or an apology. He simply walked away, his tray lighter, his indifference heavier. Noah stared at the dark drops spreading across the wood in front of us. "Grandma, he didn't even say sorry." His young voice cracked with disbelief. I reached for a stack of thin napkins left on the side and began to wipe the table myself. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if every stroke of the cloth was a way of swallowing the humiliation without letting it choke me. Noah's face flushed. "That's not fair. He saw it. He knows what he did." I looked into his eyes, bright, burning with a sense of justice only a child could hold so purely. I wanted to tell him he was right, that it was unfair, but I also knew this was not the first time, and it would not be the last. So I simply smiled, a tired but steady smile. Sometimes people show you who they are without saying a word. His small fists clenched on the table. He wanted to fight for me, but he didn't yet understand that silence, too, could be a weapon. Around us, a few customers chuckled, pretending to hide their amusement behind their cups. Victoria watched from the counter, her lips curved in the faintest trace of satisfaction, as if the spilled coffee had been a lesson meant for me. I straightened in my chair, folding the damp napkins neatly beside the plate. My coat was safe. My dignity, though tested, was still intact. I would not rise to their mockery. I would not bend under their eyes. For now, I would remain silent. But silence was not the same as weakness. I had just finished stacking the damp napkins when a voice cut through the air behind me. "She looks like a beggar." The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, but loud enough to carry, sharp enough to pierce. I didn't need to turn around to know the woman who said it. Her perfume had already filled the corner, heavy and expensive, the kind that announced its presence before she even spoke. Noah heard it too. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Grandma?" His voice trembled with both confusion and anger. I kept my hands folded on the table, my posture steady. I had learned long ago that if I turned to meet such words, I only gave them more power. But even in my silence, I felt every syllable cut into me, stripping away my years, my history, my worth, reducing me to the ragged picture painted in that single cruel sentence. The woman laughed softly, her companion joining in. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it was cruel in its restraint, like they knew the quiet sting would wound deeper than open mockery. Noah shifted in his seat, his fists balled tightly. I could see his chest rise and fall with quick breaths, his young spirit too unpracticed at swallowing injustice. "Don't listen," I whispered to him, brushing my hand over his knuckles. "But they're wrong," he said fiercely. "You're not a beggar." His innocence both broke me and held me together. In his eyes, I was whole. In his eyes, I was still the woman who baked his favorite cornbread, who told him stories of strength, who held his hand every morning. To him, I was someone worth defending, and yet, for the strangers in that cafe, I was nothing more than a shadow, a target, an easy dismissal. I straightened my back once more, refusing to let their words drag me down. My silence was my shield. My pride, though invisible to them, was carved into every line of my face. They saw a beggar. But one day, they would see the truth, that the walls around them, the very ground beneath their polished shoes, belonged to the woman they dared to ridicule. Noah could only take so much. When Victoria passed our table again, her lips pressed into a thin smile, she spoke just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "We try to keep our space refined. Some guests don't always fit the atmosphere." Her words landed like stones, casual and cruel. Before I could respond, Noah pushed back his chair so suddenly it scraped the floor. He stood, his small frame trembling, his voice louder than I had ever heard it. "Stop treating my grandma like this." Every head in the cafe turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence, coffee cups suspended in mid-air. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. My grandson's voice, so young yet so fierce, echoed against the polished walls. Victoria blinked, clearly startled. Then her smile sharpened, no longer polite, but edged with disdain. "Young man, lower your voice. This is not a place for shouting." Noah's fists were tight at his sides. His cheeks burned red, his eyes blazing. "You're mean to her just because of her clothes. You don't even know her." The room buzzed with whispers now. Some customers smirked, amused by the scene. Others shook their heads, annoyed by the disturbance. But a few, just a few, looked away, uncomfortable, as if Noah's words had revealed something they'd rather not admit. I rose slowly, placing a steady hand on Noah's shoulder. His chest heaved with anger, but I drew him closer, grounding him with my touch. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered, though my own throat ached. Victoria folded her arms, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you feel unwelcome, perhaps this establishment is not for you. There are other cafes in the city." I could feel Noah's outrage radiating through his small body, but I would not let him carry more weight than he already had. "Come, Noah," I said softly, guiding him away from the table. "We've had enough for today." His eyes glistened as he looked up at me. "Grandma, why do you let them do this?" I did not answer, not yet. My silence was not surrender, it was patience. As we stepped out into the crisp air, I held his hand tightly, my heart heavy yet steady. One day he would understand. One day he would see that strength was not always in the loudest voice, but in the quietest resolve. And when the time came, they would learn who I truly was. That evening, after Noah had gone upstairs to do his homework, I sat alone in the quiet of my study. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I always lit at dusk, a small ritual that steadied me. I pulled open the drawer of my oak desk, the wood worn smooth by decades of use. Inside were neatly stacked folders, bound contracts, and letters sealed with signatures of men and women who never looked twice at me in the street. At the very top was the deed, the official paper, heavy with ink and authority, declaring me the sole owner of the building where I had been humiliated. I placed it gently on the desk, smoothing its edges as though it was something fragile, though I knew it was anything but. My fingers traced the name written across the top, Eleanor Whitmore, my name, my truth. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The words from the cafe echoed in my mind. Beggar, charity case, doesn't fit the atmosphere. Each insult tried to cling to me, but here, in this room filled with evidence of what I had built, they could not hold. I had not inherited this. I had worked for it, every dollar saved, every sacrifice made, every decision measured carefully. The property was mine because I had earned it piece by piece, while the very people who sneered at me had never known such struggle. My silence in that cafe was not weakness. It was choice, a choice I had made countless times in my life. But silence has its limits. Noah's voice returned to me, trembling yet strong. Stop treating my grandma like this. His anger had cracked something inside me, something I had kept locked away for too long. I opened my eyes and rested my hand over the deed. A calm certainty washed over me. The time for silence was ending. They believed I was invisible. They believed I had no power. But soon they would see. 2 days later, I returned to the building. This time, I came alone. Noah had school, and I didn't want his young heart burdened with the sharp edges of adults' cruelty again. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. I walked with measured steps, my old coat buttoned neatly, my scarf tied in its usual knot. Inside the lobby, the marble floors gleamed under the soft light. Men in tailored suits passed quickly. Women in high heels tapped across the tiles with practiced grace. No one paused to look at me. No one suspected. And then, there she was. Victoria stood near the cafe entrance, her voice bright as she greeted a man carrying a leather briefcase. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing her hair back in a gesture too polished to be casual. When her eyes shifted and landed on me, her smile faltered for only a second. "Oh," she said, her tone turning flat. "You're back." I gave her a small nod. "Yes, I am." She looked me up and down, the way one might glance at an unwelcome shadow. "We've had complaints," she said, lowering her voice. "Some guests felt uncomfortable last time. I'd hate for that to happen again." Her words slid into me like thin needles, meant to sting, but never openly cruel enough to expose themselves. She wanted me to feel small without giving me anything to fight against. I held her gaze. Steady, silent. For a moment the weight of my quiet unsettled her. She shifted, smoothing her skirt as if to reassure herself of her place above me. "I'll be around," I said softly, my voice calm, almost gentle. And I turned away, walking deeper into the lobby, my steps echoing against the marble. I felt her eyes on my back, sharp and suspicious. She did not know why I had returned. She did not know what I carried in my bag, documents, contracts, proof. But she would know soon. Every cruel smile, every cutting word, every whispered insult, they were adding up, and the bill was coming due. The cafe was crowded that afternoon. the kind of crowd that made whispers spread quickly and laughter echo too long. I chose a small table near the entrance, setting my bag carefully on the chair beside me. Inside, it lay the documents I had carried for days, waiting for the right moment. Victoria noticed me immediately. Her lips pressed into that familiar smile, polite for others, poisonous for me. She walked over, her heels clicking against the polished floor, every step deliberate. "Ma'am," she said, her voice clear enough for nearby tables to hear, "I'm afraid we cannot serve charity cases today." The words sliced through the cafe like glass shattering. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Even the barista behind the counter froze, his hand hovering above the register. I felt every eye on me, measured, judged, dismissed. Before I could respond, I heard Noah's voice. "Grandma!" He came rushing in, breathless from running. His school day had just ended and I had promised to meet him here. His innocent smile faded as he saw the scene unfolding. His small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's not a charity case," he shouted, his young voice breaking through the silence. "She's my grandma, and you don't even know who she is." The room buzzed with whispers, a ripple of shock and discomfort. Some laughed under their breath, enjoying the spectacle. Others watched with uneasy curiosity. Victoria placed a hand on her hip, her expression tight, though her tone dripped with superiority. "This establishment reserves the right to maintain its standards. Perhaps another location would be more fitting." Noah's eyes glistened with tears, his anger trembling at the edge of breaking. He looked at me, pleading silently for me to fight back this time. And I knew. The moment had come. I placed my hand gently over his, steadying him. My heart no longer ached with humiliation. It burned with resolve. I rose from my chair, the bag at my side. For weeks I had endured the whispers, the smirks, the condescension. For years I had been underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. But not today. I looked at Victoria, my voice calm but firm. "If you insist on speaking of standards, then perhaps it's time I remind you exactly who sets them here." Her smile flickered, a crack. For the first time, doubt touched her face. The silence of the cafe grew heavier, every person waiting for my next words. And I was ready. I stood tall, my bag resting against my hip, my hand steady as I reached inside. The cafe was silent now, every eye fixed on me. Even the sound of the espresso machine had stilled, as if the room itself was holding its breath. From the leather folder, I drew out the papers I had guarded so carefully. I placed them on the table, the heavy stamp and signatures clear for anyone who cared to look. "This," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the room, "is the deed to this building." A murmur spread through the cafe, a wave of disbelief rolling from table to table. Victoria blinked, her mouth opening slightly before she caught herself. I looked directly at her. "I am not a guest here. I am not a burden. I am the owner of this building." The words fell into the silence like stones in water, rippling outward. Customers leaned forward, their curiosity turning into stunned. A man in a suit adjusted his tie nervously. A woman lowered her coffee cup, suddenly unsure of herself. Victoria's face drained of its false composure. "That can't be." But I cut her off with nothing more than my steady gaze. "Every floor, every office, every shop, they are mine, and with a single decision, I can choose who belongs here and who does not." The weight of my words settled over her. Her confidence cracked, her polished smile slipping like a mask torn from her face. Noah's small hand squeezed mine, his eyes wide with pride. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not just as his grandmother, but as someone unshakable, someone powerful. I felt no need to raise my voice. Power doesn't shout, It doesn't need to. It reveals itself, and the truth alone is louder than any insult. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and placed it neatly in my bag. Then I looked around the room, letting my eyes meet those who had smirked, whispered, and laughed at me just days before. One by one, their gazes fell away. The silence now belonged to me. The cafe had shifted. Where once there had been laughter and whispers, now there was only silence, thick and uneasy. Eyes that had judged me now avoided mine, as if ashamed to be caught in the very act of scorn. Victoria stood frozen, her polished confidence slipping through her fingers. "Mrs. Whitmore," she stammered, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," I said evenly, "because you never bothered to look beyond what you wanted to see." Her cheeks flushed, and she straightened her shoulders as if she might still salvage her pride. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I assure you, it was never my intention to offend." "It was your intention to humiliate," I interrupted gently, not raising my voice. "And you succeeded, but that ends today." Around us, customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The barista stared down at the counter, his face pale. Even those who had laughed days earlier now looked as though they wished to disappear. I turned to Victoria, my words slow, deliberate. "From this moment forward, this cafe will operate with respect for every person who walks through those doors. I will not tolerate arrogance disguised as hospitality. If you wish to remain here, you will learn the difference." She swallowed hard, her silence louder than any protest. I glanced toward the employees. "That applies to all of you. Service built on mockery is no service at all." For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, I gathered my bag and placed it over my shoulder. Noah beamed up at me, his pride shining brighter than any spotlight. To him, I wasn't just grandma anymore. I was a woman who carried her dignity like armor and her truth like a crown. As I walked toward the door, the room seemed smaller, quieter. Victoria's arrogance had collapsed under the weight of truth, and in its place lingered only the memory of a lesson they would not forget. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to punish. My presence alone was enough. The building was mine, and now so was their silence. As I stepped out of the cafe, the late afternoon sun bathed the sidewalk in gold. Noah slipped his hand into mine, his grip small but strong, steadying me in a way he didn't even realize. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You didn't even yell. You just told them the truth." I smiled, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "Because the truth doesn't need to shout, Noah. It speaks for itself." For years I had carried the weight of being invisible, judged by my clothes, my age, my silence. People had mistaken my quiet for weakness, my patience for surrender. But today they saw what silence can hold: strength, dignity, and a power deeper than arrogance. I didn't need to humiliate them as they had humiliated me. I didn't need to take revenge with cruelty. My revenge was in my presence, in my ownership, in my refusal to bow, and most of all, my revenge was in showing Noah that dignity is never something the world can strip away, unless you let it. I looked down at him, his eyes bright, his spirit unshaken. In that moment, I knew the lesson had been planted, not in them, but in him, and that was enough. We walked on hand in hand, leaving behind the cafe, the whispers, the arrogance. I felt lighter, not because the insults had vanished, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Some battles are not won with noise. They are won with quiet strength, and mine had been won today. Would you have stayed silent as I did until the right moment came? Or would you have spoken sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.